The hurricane warnings had come too late for the outer islands. Rowan Pierce gripped the controls of his rescue helicopter tighter as another gust of wind threatened to throw him off course. The night sky above the Pacific Northwest coast was an impenetrable wall of black clouds, illuminated only by frequent bursts of lightning that turned the storm into a strobe-lit nightmare. "Coast Guard Station, this is Rescue 1, he called into his radio. Visibility 0. Wind speeds exceeding safety parameters. Requesting permission to abort search pattern." Static crackled through his headset before a broken response came through. "Rescue 1, detected, anomalous, continue search, coordinates." Rowan cursed as the transmission cut out completely. He'd been flying search and rescue for 8 years, but he'd never seen a storm this severe. The weather had appeared out of nowhere, defying all predictions and natural patterns. Even his most experienced colleagues had been baffled by its sudden intensity. A flash of light caught his attention, different from the lightning. It was a steady, pulsing glow emanating from a small island below. The color was wrong, a soft violet that seemed to ripple through the rain. His instruments began to malfunction, needles spinning wildly as the helicopter's electronics went haywire. "This is Rescue 1, I'm seeing something." He began, but the radio only produced dead air. The glow intensified, and Rowan made a decision. If someone was down there signaling for help, storm or not, he had to investigate. He brought the helicopter down on a relatively flat stretch of beach, the wind battering the aircraft as its skids touched down. Grabbing his emergency kit and flashlight, Rowan stepped out into the storm. The rain felt wrong on his skin, too warm, almost electric. Following the mysterious light, he pushed through dense underbrush until he reached a small clearing. What he found made him stop dead in his tracks. A craft of some kind lay half buried in the earth, its sleek silver hull torn open like a gutted fish. It was no airplane or boat, the design was completely alien, its surface covered in swirling patterns that seemed to shift in the darkness. The violet light pulsed from within the wreckage, growing weaker with each flash. "Hello?" Rowan called out, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "Anyone there? This is Coast Guard Search and Rescue." A sound reached him then, cutting through the storm, a keening cry that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It was unlike anything he'd ever heard, somewhere between a whale song and crystal breaking. Following the sound, he climbed carefully over the wreckage until he reached the torn-open cabin. Inside, he found her. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him in the strange light. Her skin was opalescent, shifting between deep blue and violet like the surface of a soap bubble. Where human hair should be, delicate tendrils that looked like fiber optic cables flowed from her head, dimly pulsing with the same light he'd seen from above. She was humanoid, but clearly not human. She was also badly injured. Dark fluid that might have been blood seeped from several wounds, and one of her legs was pinned beneath a twisted piece of metal. When she saw him, her eyes widened, solid silver orbs with no pupils, and she tried to shrink away, only to cry out in pain. "It's okay," Rowan said softly, holding up his hands. "I'm here to help. I'm not going to hurt you." He kept his voice calm and steady, the same tone he used with injured hikers and frightened children during rescues. Though she couldn't understand his words, she seemed to respond to his tone, her glow dimming slightly as some of the tension left her body. Moving slowly, he set down his kit and took out his medical supplies. The alien watched his every move, her head tilted slightly as if studying him. When he reached toward her, she flinched, but didn't try to pull away. Up close, her skin seemed to ripple like the surface of water, and he could feel a slight electrical charge in the air around her. The storm raged around them as Rowan worked to free her from the wreckage. The metal was unlike anything he'd ever encountered, lighter than it should be but incredibly strong. Finally, using a piece of the ship's hull as a lever, he managed to lift the debris enough for her to pull her leg free. She was going into shock, or whatever passed for shock in her species. Her glow was fading, and her skin was growing darker, less iridescent. Rowan knew he had to get her to shelter fast, but the helicopter would be a risk in this weather. As if reading his thoughts, she reached out and touched his arm. An image flashed through his mind, his cabin, just a few miles down the coast. He jerked back in surprise, staring at her. She met his gaze steadily, and he understood. Somehow, she'd seen the thought in his mind and recognized it as sanctuary. Making a decision that would change both their lives forever, Rowan gently lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her body giving off a subtle warmth that seemed to seep into his very bones. As he carried her back toward the helicopter, she pressed her face against his chest, seeking warmth or comfort or both. The storm seemed to intensify around them, as if nature itself was trying to stop their escape. Lightning struck a tree barely 50 feet away, sending splinters of burning wood into the air. Rowan ran the last few yards to the helicopter, his heart pounding. As he secured her in the passenger seat, he caught movement in the trees, something large and dark, watching them with eyes that reflected the lightning like mirrors. He scrambled into the pilot's seat and fired up the engine. The helicopter's instruments were still malfunctioning, but Rowan knew these waters like the back of his hand. He lifted off just as another lightning bolt struck where they'd been moments before. The alien's glow pulsed weakly as they rose into the storm, and Rowan realized she was trying to help. Each pulse seemed to clear the air around them slightly, creating a bubble of calm in the chaos. As they flew through the night, Rowan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Something had followed this mysterious woman to Earth, something that had perhaps caused this unnatural storm. And now, for better or worse, their fates were intertwined. Dawn broke over the coast, painting the sky in subdued purples and grays. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by its fury. Rowan's cabin, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean, had weathered the tempest well enough. Inside, he watched as his unusual guest slept fitfully on his bed, her luminescent skin casting shifting patterns on the walls. He'd spent the night tending to her injuries as best he could, though human first aid supplies seemed primitive compared to the advanced technology scattered through the wreckage of her ship. Her wounds appeared to be healing at an extraordinary rate, the torn flesh knitting itself together before his eyes, leaving behind traces of silvery scarring. The alien, he really needed to learn her name, stirred and opened her silver eyes. She took in her surroundings with careful deliberation before focusing on Rowan. Sitting up slowly, she touched her healed wounds with an expression he interpreted as surprise. "Your body seems to heal itself pretty quickly," Rowan said, keeping his voice gentle. "I'm Rowan, by the way." He tapped his chest, repeating the gesture she'd understood during their escape. She mimicked his movement, pressing her hand to her own chest. What emerged from her lips was unlike any sound he'd heard before, a melodic series of tones that seemed to ripple through the air like waves on water. Seeing his confusion, she simplified it to something his human vocal cords might manage: Thessa. Thessa, he repeated, and she nodded, a very human gesture that made him wonder how long she'd been observing their species. She reached out tentatively, her fingertips stopping just short of touching his forehead. Her eyes met his, asking permission. Rowan nodded, and her cool fingers made contact with his skin. Immediately, his mind was flooded with images and sensations. He saw a world with twin suns, crystal spires that sang in the wind, and beings like Thessa moving through gardens that glowed with bioluminescent life. But beneath these beautiful images lay darker ones, laboratories, painful experiments, and a desperate flight through the stars. When the connection broke, Rowan found himself gasping, overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience. Thessa watched him with concern, her skin rippling with patterns he was beginning to recognize as emotional expressions. "You're a telepath," he said, though the word seemed inadequate to describe what he'd just experienced. "And you're running from something." She nodded again, then pointed to her chest and made a flowing gesture with her hands. Next, she pointed to various objects around the room: a potted plant, a cut on Rowan's hand from the rescue, a bird with a broken wing that had crashed into his window during the storm. Each time, she repeated the flowing gesture. "You heal things?" Rowan guessed. The pattern on her skin shifted to what he was learning meant affirmation. "That's why they were after you. They wanted to use your abilities." Before she could respond, a deep thrumming filled the air. Thessa's skin went almost completely dark, fear. Rowan rushed to the window and saw 3 black helicopters approaching from the south, nothing like the Coast Guard vehicles he was familiar with. "We need to go," he said urgently, already gathering essential supplies into a backpack. "Those aren't friendly." He didn't know how he was so certain, but the knowledge felt burned into his mind from their mental contact. Thessa was already moving, her movements now fluid and graceful as her body continued to heal. She pressed her hand against the cabin's wall, and Rowan watched in amazement as the wood grain began to shift and flow, creating a false panel that concealed their emergency supplies. The helicopters were getting closer. Rowan led Thessa to the back door, but she pulled him to a stop. Placing her hands on either side of his face, she shared another vision, this one of underground caves along the coastline, hidden passages she'd somehow sensed during their flight. "You're full of surprises," Rowan muttered, but he trusted her instincts. They slipped out of the cabin just as the helicopters crested the nearest hill. Moving quickly through the underbrush, they made their way down a nearly invisible trail that wound along the cliff face. Thessa stopped at what appeared to be a solid rock wall, covered in moss and vines. Her skin began to glow softly as she pressed her hands against the stone. Under her touch, the vines moved aside, revealing a narrow opening. They squeezed through just as voices and the sound of boots on gravel echoed from above. Inside the cave, Thessa's natural bioluminescence provided enough light to navigate by. The passage twisted deeper into the earth, and Rowan realized it was part of an extensive natural cave system he'd never known existed. The air grew cooler, and the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. They emerged into a larger cavern where underground springs had created pools of crystal-clear water. Bioluminescent fungi grew along the walls, responding to Thessa's presence by glowing brighter. She approached one of the pools and knelt beside it, her reflection rippling in the still water. "What did they do to you?" Rowan asked softly, though he wasn't expecting an answer he could understand. To his surprise, Thessa began to draw in the soft sand beside the pool. Her drawings were simple but clear, figures like herself, connected by lines of energy, healing and helping others. Then darker figures, holding weapons, forcing her people to use their gifts for destruction. She drew her own escape, and then something that made Rowan's blood run cold: massive ships, hidden in the dark spaces between stars, waiting to follow her trail to Earth. Her people's abilities made them valuable, and Earth's abundant life force made it a tempting target. "They're coming here," Rowan realized. "And you're trying to warn us." Thessa's skin swirled with patterns of determination and something else: trust, perhaps even hope. She stood and held out her hand to him. When he took it, the connection between them deepened. He saw flashes of possible futures, humanity and her people working together, sharing knowledge and healing abilities, standing united against the darkness that pursued them. But first, they had to survive. The sounds of searching helicopters echoed faintly through the cave system. Their hunters were thorough, and it would only be a matter of time before they found the cave entrance. Yet as Rowan looked at Thessa, seeing the strength and resilience in her otherworldly eyes, he knew he would do whatever it took to protect her, not just for her sake, but for the future she represented. She squeezed his hand gently, and in that gesture was a promise. Whatever came next, they would face it together. 3 days in the caves had taught Rowan more about alien life than he'd ever imagined possible. Thessa's presence seemed to awaken something in the underground ecosystem. The bioluminescent fungi responded to her touch, growing into patterns that provided both light and a strange, nutrient-rich substance that sustained them. Through their brief mental connections, she'd shown him how her people lived in harmony with such life forms across the galaxy. But their peaceful existence in the caves couldn't last. The hunters above hadn't given up, if anything, their search had intensified. Through the cave system's natural acoustics, Rowan could hear the thrum of helicopters and the distant bark of search dogs. What troubled him more were the other sounds, inhuman shrieks and metallic clicking that suggested their pursuers weren't all human. "They're getting closer," Rowan whispered, though he knew Thessa could sense his concern without words. They had taken refuge in a deeper chamber where underground thermal vents provided warmth and concealment from thermal imaging. Thessa's skin rippled with dark patterns of worry. She pressed her hand against the cave wall, and Rowan felt the vibrations through the stone, more searchers, entering the cave system from multiple points. They were being surrounded. A high-pitched whine filled the air, making Rowan's teeth ache. Thessa's skin flared with recognition and fear. Through their connection, he caught glimpses of the hunters, cybernetically enhanced beings from a dozen worlds, bound to the will of their masters through brutal technological manipulation. They were tracking her unique energy signature. "We need to move," Rowan said, gathering their few supplies. But Thessa caught his arm, her expression urgent. She pressed her forehead to his, sharing a rapid series of images, the hunters' neural implants, their weaknesses, and a desperate plan. Rowan pulled back, staring at her. "You want to heal them? The ones hunting us?" The patterns in her skin confirmed it. Her people's healing abilities could do more than mend physical wounds, they could restore minds and free wills corrupted by technology and control. But the risk was enormous. To heal the hunters, she would have to get close enough to touch them, and the effort could leave her vulnerable. Yet Rowan understood, these weren't just hunters, they were victims themselves, forced to track down beings like Thessa for their master's cruel purposes. The whining grew louder, accompanied by the sound of claws on stone. They were out of time. Thessa's skin began to glow brighter, and she pulled Rowan into a narrow side passage just as the first hunter entered their chamber. Through a gap in the rocks, Rowan got his first clear look at their pursuers. The creature had once been humanoid, but cybernetic enhancements had transformed it into something nightmarish. Its skin was a patchwork of metal and scaled flesh, and its eyes were replaced by scanning arrays that swept the chamber with red beams. Behind it came others, some more machine than flesh, all bearing the same signs of forced modification. Thessa squeezed Rowan's hand once, then stepped out into the open before he could stop her. The hunters immediately locked onto her position, weapons rising. But instead of running or fighting, she began to sing. The sound was unlike anything Rowan had ever heard, pure tones that seemed to resonate with the very rocks around them. The hunters froze. Their cybernetic components sparked and whined as Thessa's song interfered with their control systems. She approached the nearest one, her skin glowing like a star, and placed her hands on either side of its twisted face. Energy flowed from her into the hunter, causing its technological components to short out and fall away. Beneath the metal and mutations, Rowan saw the hunter's original form emerge, a being not unlike Thessa, with iridescent skin and silver eyes. One by one, she moved among the hunters, her song growing stronger as each freed individual joined their voice to hers. The cave chamber filled with harmonies that made Rowan's heart ache with their beauty and sorrow. But the effort was taking its toll. Thessa's glow was dimming, her movements becoming sluggish. Through their bond, Rowan felt her exhaustion and pain, each healing drained her life force significantly. As she reached the last hunter, her legs buckled. Rowan rushed forward to catch her, but movement at the chamber entrance made him turn. A new group of hunters had arrived, these ones fully human, wearing black tactical gear and carrying weapons that hummed with deadly energy. Leading them was a tall woman with cold eyes and an aura of authority. "Step away from the asset," she commanded, her voice carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed. "Subject Theta-17 is property of the Artemis Corporation, and you are interfering with a classified retrieval operation." The freed hunters moved to surround Thessa and Rowan, their silver eyes glowing with protective fury. The woman, clearly some kind of corporate executive or military leader, seemed unimpressed. "If you think those defective units can protect you, you're mistaken," she said. "We've been tracking Theta-17 since she escaped our facility. Her healing abilities are far too valuable to be wasted on humanitarian purposes." She spat the last words like they tasted bitter. Thessa stirred in Rowan's arms, her skin flickering weakly. Through their connection, he felt her gathering her remaining strength for one final effort. The freed hunters began to sing again, their voices building into a resonance that made the cave walls shake. The corporate soldiers raised their weapons, but Thessa's power, amplified by the freed hunters, struck first. A wave of pure healing energy exploded outward, passing through everything in the chamber. Where it touched the soldiers, their weapons crumbled to dust, decades of corporate conditioning and psychological manipulation unraveling in an instant. The woman in charge screamed in rage as her own carefully constructed mental walls collapsed, revealing the truth of what she'd done, the lives she'd destroyed, the beings she'd tortured, all in the name of profit and power. She fell to her knees, overwhelmed by the weight of unfiltered reality. But the healing wave had taken the last of Thessa's strength. Her skin went dark, her breathing shallow. Rowan held her close, feeling their connection fade as she slipped into unconsciousness. The freed hunters gathered around them, their songs turning to worried murmurs. "Stay with me," Rowan whispered, his voice breaking. "We won this round, you showed them a better way. You can't give up now." As if in response to his words, a soft violet light began to fill the chamber, but it wasn't coming from Thessa. The bioluminescent fungi on the walls were glowing brighter, and tendrils of energy were flowing from them into her still form. The very life force of Earth itself was reaching out to help her, recognizing a kindred spirit in its hour of need. The Earth itself seemed to breathe new life into Thessa. The cave's bioluminescent network pulsed with energy, creating a web of light that enveloped her unconscious form. Rowan watched in amazement as color slowly returned to her iridescent skin, though she remained unconscious. The freed hunters surrounded them in a protective circle, their silver eyes glowing with determination. "We must move," one of them said in a melodic voice, speaking English with careful precision. "More will come. The Artemis Corporation has invested too much to abandon the hunt." "She's too weak to travel," Rowan protested, cradling Thessa's still form. The hunter who had spoken, who had introduced himself as Nyrix, shook his head gravely. "The surface is no longer safe. There is another way, but—" Nyrix hesitated, his skin shifting with patterns of concern. "It requires great trust. And sacrifice." Before Rowan could ask what he meant, alarms began blaring from above. Through the cave system's acoustics, they could hear the sounds of heavy vehicles and what might have been helicopter gunships. The Artemis Corporation was done playing games, they were bringing in serious military hardware. Thessa stirred in Rowan's arms, her eyes fluttering open. Her skin rippled with patterns of pain and exhaustion, but also determination. She reached up to touch Rowan's face, sharing a vision of what needed to be done. His eyes widened as he understood. "You want to create a permanent bond," he said softly. "Like the one between members of your species." Through their connection, she showed him what it would mean. The healing bond was sacred among her people, a joining of minds and life forces that could never be broken. It would allow them to share strength, to heal each other, but it would also bind their fates together permanently. If one died, the other would feel that loss for the rest of their life. "Why me?" Rowan asked, though part of him already knew the answer. In the short time they'd known each other, they'd formed a connection that went beyond species or language. He'd seen the beauty and pain in her world, and she'd recognized the capacity for compassion and growth in his. The cave shook as explosions echoed from above. The corporation was using seismic charges to try to collapse the cave system. Time was running out. The bond must be mutual, Nyrix explained quickly. Both parties must be willing to sacrifice part of themselves for the other. It has never been attempted between our species and yours. The risk. I'll do it, Rowan said without hesitation. Thessa's skin brightened with emotion, and she pressed her forehead to his. The other hunters formed a circle around them, their voices rising in a harmonic that seemed to stabilize the shaking cavern. Through their touch, Rowan felt the process begin. It was like nothing he could have imagined, as if every cell in his body was being rewritten, tuned to a new frequency. He saw flashes of Thessa's life, her childhood among the crystal spires, her training as a healer, the horror of being captured and experimented on by the corporation. She, in turn, experienced his memories, lonely nights on rescue missions, the joy of saving lives, the emptiness of never quite belonging anywhere. The pain was intense as their life forces merged, but so was the beauty. Rowan felt his consciousness expanding, becoming aware of the web of life that connected all things. He could sense the cave fungi, the underground streams, even the microscopic organisms that filled the air. Through Thessa's awareness, he understood how all life was connected, how healing one part affected the whole. Above them, the corporation's weapons continued their assault. But now, working as one, Rowan and Thessa reached out to the living network around them. The cave fungi responded, growing and hardening into supporting structures that prevented the tunnel's collapse. The very rocks seemed to shift, creating new passages and sealing others. As the bond solidified, something unexpected happened. Rowan's natural human resilience and adaptability began to enhance Thessa's healing abilities. Where her power had been focused and specific, their combined energy could affect larger systems. Together, they could not just heal individuals, but restore balance to entire ecosystems. The freed hunters watched in awe as the cave system itself came alive under their influence. Bioluminescent patterns spread across the walls, creating a map of safe passages and highlighting structural weaknesses that needed reinforcement. Through their shared consciousness, Rowan and Thessa coordinated the hunters' efforts to secure their underground sanctuary. But the corporation wasn't giving up. New sounds echoed through the caves, the heavy tread of combat mechs and the whine of energy weapons powering up. They had brought in their elite shock troops, heavily augmented soldiers in powered armor suits designed to operate in the most hostile environments. Thessa's fear rippled through their bond, not for herself but for Rowan. The combat mechs were equipped with weapons designed specifically to disrupt her species' energy patterns. A direct hit could permanently damage their newly formed connection, or worse. "I won't let them hurt you," Rowan said, the words carrying the weight of an unbreakable vow through their bond. He could feel Thessa's determination matching his own. They had found something precious and rare, a bridge between species, a proof that different forms of life could not just coexist but strengthen each other. The heavy footsteps grew closer. Rowan and Thessa stood together, their combined energy illuminating the cave like a miniature sun. The freed hunters took up defensive positions, their own abilities enhanced by proximity to the bonded pair. Whatever came through that tunnel would face not just weapons or powers, but the unshakable truth that life, in all its forms, would fight to remain free. Through their bond, Rowan felt Thessa's touch on his mind, not with words, but with a feeling of complete trust and something deeper, something that transcended simple human definitions of love. Whatever happened next, they would face it as one being, their strengths combined, their weaknesses covered by each other's capabilities. The first mech rounded the corner, its weapons charging with an ominous whine. But Rowan and Thessa were ready. Together, they had found something worth fighting for, not just their own survival, but a future where different species could learn from each other, heal each other, and grow stronger together. The combat mechs filled the tunnel with their hulking forms, weapons trained on Rowan and Thessa. Through their bond, they could sense the pilots inside, more victims of the Artemis Corporation, their minds clouded by chemical conditioning and neural implants. Behind the mechs came a figure they recognized, the corporate executive, her face twisted with rage and desperation. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," she snarled. "The healing powers of species like Theta-17 could revolutionize human medicine, create super soldiers, extend life indefinitely. The profits alone." "Her name is Thessa," Rowan interrupted, his voice carrying the strength of their combined will. "And she's not your property." Through their bond, he and Thessa reached out to the mech pilots' minds. It was different from her previous healings. With their combined abilities, they could sense the specific chemicals and technologies used to control the pilots. Rowan's human insight helped identify the weaknesses in the corporation's methods, while Thessa's healing power gave them the means to exploit them. The executive must have sensed what they were attempting. "Fire," she commanded. "Maximum power." Energy beams lanced through the cave, but the freed hunters had been busy during their last stand. The cave fungi, enhanced by Thessa's power and guided by Rowan's strategic thinking, had grown into crystalline structures that reflected and dispersed the energy attacks. The air filled with refracted light, creating a dazzling display that confused the mech's targeting systems. In that moment of chaos, Rowan and Thessa struck. Their combined healing energy flowed through the cave like a tidal wave, targeting the specific frequencies that would disrupt the corporation's control methods. One by one, the mech pilots began to wake up, their minds clearing as years of conditioning dissolved. The executive screamed in frustration and drew a weapon of her own, a prototype designed to disrupt the healing bond itself. But before she could fire, the ground beneath her feet came alive. The cave fungi, responding to Rowan and Thessa's shared will, grew at impossible speeds, encasing her in a living prison. The freed mech pilots, their minds their own again, turned on their former masters. Throughout the cave system, corporate soldiers found themselves facing not just hostile terrain, but an entire ecosystem that had awakened to defend itself. The tide had turned. But victory came with a price. The strain of maintaining such large-scale healing was taking its toll on both Rowan and Thessa. Through their bond, they could feel each other's exhaustion, the dangerous depletion of their combined life force. They needed to end this quickly. Thessa shared an image through their connection, the strange ships she'd sensed in orbit, waiting to retrieve their asset by any means necessary. Earth wasn't safe, not just for her but for any world where beings like her could be exploited. The corporation was just one symptom of a larger problem. Understanding flowed between them. They had to take the fight beyond Earth, to expose the truth to the galactic community and find allies who would help protect worlds from such exploitation. But that meant leaving everything Rowan had ever known. "I go where you go," he said simply, the words carrying all his love and dedication through their bond. Thessa's skin rippled with joy and gratitude, their shared emotions creating patterns of light that danced across the cave walls. The freed hunters approached, led by Nyrix. "The corporate forces are retreating," he reported. "But their ships will be watching all known spaceports and launch facilities." Thessa smiled, an expression she'd learned from Rowan. Through their bond, she shared another secret: her crashed ship hadn't been completely destroyed. Its core systems, including the faster-than-light drive, were intact. With the hunters' help and the healing energy they now shared, it could be repaired. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. While corporate forces searched the surface, Rowan and Thessa worked with the hunters to salvage and repair the ship. Their bond grew stronger each day, allowing them to work in perfect synchronization. The cave fungi provided both camouflage and raw materials, its crystalline structures incorporating seamlessly with the ship's alien technology. Word of what had happened spread through underground channels. Other corporate victims came forward, sharing stories of exploitation and abuse. Earth's governments, faced with evidence of private companies making unauthorized alien contact, began investigations. The Artemis Corporation's stock price plummeted as shareholders fled. Finally, the ship was ready. It was different now, a hybrid of alien technology and Earth's living systems, powered by the same energy that flowed between Rowan and Thessa. The freed hunters would remain behind, working with sympathetic humans to protect against future exploitation and prepare Earth for open contact with the galactic community. On the night of their departure, Rowan stood at the ship's viewport, watching his home world grow smaller. Thessa stood beside him, their hands clasped, their shared consciousness filled with both sadness and hope. Through their bond, they could feel the vastness of space calling to them, countless worlds where their unique abilities could help maintain the balance between technology and life. "Ready?" Thessa asked, speaking aloud in carefully practiced English. Rowan smiled, sending waves of love and certainty through their bond. "With you? Always." The ship's crystalline hull pulsed with energy as they activated the drive. In a flash of light that rippled like Thessa's skin, they vanished into the depths of space, leaving behind a changed world and carrying with them the proof that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in conquering or controlling, but in its capacity to connect, to heal, and to grow beyond its limitations. On Earth, in the caves where their story began, the bioluminescent fungi continued to grow in new patterns, spelling out in living light the promise of a future where different species could join together, healing the wounds of the past and building something greater than either could achieve alone. Their legacy would live on, a reminder that love and trust could bridge the gaps between the stars themselves.